Thank you. So my name is Levy. I'm the head of drug development at Amgen. And I'm going to talk to you this morning about the importance of real-world evidence in product development from the perspective of a professional drug developer. I'm speaking from my 20-plus years of experience in the field, and the views that I'll express are my own, not necessarily those of my employer, but I suspect they're broadly shared by people with positions similar to mine in the industry. I think we probably all believe that we really are living in extraordinary times. There is a confluence of new technologies and the availability of new data sources that have the potential to transform medicinal product development and to allow us to introduce medicines that will have larger treatment effects and provide much greater benefits to both patients and society. We have, I think, a variety of emerging technologies that are very exciting. Bispecific proteins were first described in 1985, and after 30 years of work, the technology's matured to a point where we now can direct a T cell to kill a cancer cell that is not its natural target. We can also reprogram a T cell with a vector so that it expresses a chimeric antigen receptor. And with these CAR T cells, we've seen response rates exceeding 80% in patients with highly refractory malignancies. We can use oncolytic viruses to kill tumor cells in a manner that's completely agnostic to their tissue of origin or to their pattern of antigen expression. And we can use nucleic acid therapies to achieve very long-lasting treatment effects, perhaps up to 6 months, and transform many treatments from something the patient provides to themselves to something that could be administered infrequently in the physician's office. We also have access to an unprecedented array of data. We can use genetics to identify novel and unexpected targets and to validate those targets in humans. We have access now to mountains of data from completed clinical trials that we can use to optimize clinical trial design. And of course, we have access to vast amounts of claims data and electronic health record data that can be used to optimize trial design and for a variety of other purposes. So all this is quite exciting, but it will be expensive. We need to invest in refining the technologies, reducing them to practice, industrializing them, and we also need to invest in building the infrastructure that's necessary to fully exploit the new data sources. And these new costs are coming at a time that is challenging, to put it in mild terms. We have experienced for a number of decades a steady increase in the cost of developing a new medicine to the point of initial marketing authorization. Most recent data suggests that the cost of getting a new drug to market increased at almost 10% per year over the last decade, continuing a trend that's been observed for at least 3 decades. What's really changed in the last decade is that revenues at biopharmaceutical companies are rising slowly, and revenues net of discounts and rebates are essentially flat. So we are challenged now to find a way to exploit new technologies and new data sources without new funds for investment. The causes of the high cost of bringing drugs to market, I think, are well known. Failure rates in drug development continue to be high. About 1 in 10 product candidates reaches the market. Most of the money we spend, actually 90% of it, is spent on candidates that will fail in development. So despite our growing understanding of human biology, it still appears that our ability to identify targets outstrips our ability to validate and confirm their importance. Although there are obviously well-publicized cases of drugs reaching market now with large effect sizes and small data packages, overall the data requirements for approval of new products, I feel strongly, are increasing with increasing demand for active comparator data, patient-reported outcomes, and long-term safety follow-up. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the greatest part of the cost of drug development is simply the cost of collecting the data in the physician's office. And those costs are rising at a rate that we know greatly exceeds the general rate of cost inflation. There's also an increasingly important cost to maintain drugs in the market for R&D organizations like our own. We're challenged now to run increasingly large programs in children and in other special populations. There are ever-increasing demands to understand the safety of our products in the marketplace, and then a vast amount of data that has to be conducted market by market to understand the health system impact and the value of our products. I haven't found any research that's quantified the rate of increase in the cost of maintaining drugs on the market, but I'm fairly certain that for R&D organizations that rate is greater than the rate of increase in the cost of bringing new drugs to market. New drug costs, these costs are linked to the general rate of medical service inflation, but they also tend to grow as product portfolios grow. So with every new product we introduce in the marketplace, the cost of maintaining that portfolio rises. And so this cost disease is really a formidable challenge to our ability to realize the promise of new technologies and new data sources and bring to market truly transformative medicines, not simply those that provide incremental benefit. What can be done? I want to talk about the options, which of course, as you'll suspect, will lead to the conclusion that real-world evidence must play a critical role in addressing this issue. Over the past 10 to 15 years, research and development organizations have adopted classic continuous improvement methodologies. These methodologies include business process simplification and rationalization, improved resource management and procurement processes, labor cost arbitrage, moving certain activities to low-cost geographies, and finally, automation of trial operations. These approaches typically yield significant savings initially, but with time, less. Some of them are really one-time activities. Once you've created a data management unit in India and realize the savings from doing that, you can't realize the savings from doing it again. Other activities can be repeated. One can continue to rationalize work processes, but typically these activities are subject to the law of diminishing returns. So in a comprehensive and well-run, mature continuous improvement program in a variety of industries, you typically see savings on the order of 3 to 4% per year, which of course are far less than the 9 to 10% increase in the cost of bringing new products to market. And of course, I'd point out that these reported data on the cost of bringing new product to market already reflect the activities of R&D organizations over the past decade to control costs. The 9% is essentially what you see after you take advantage of all these approaches. So what can be done then to really try to not just blunt the rate of increase in the costs of developing innovative new medicines, but to actually stop the increase or to reverse it? Well, we could contemplate, I think, more radical changes in the way that we conduct and administer trials. And risk-based monitoring is such an approach. It's been an intense focus of activity over the last 10 years, subject of regulatory guidance. We have experience in developing and refining an advanced program for risk-based monitoring. And what we've discovered is that there's a savings of about 20% of the cost of monitoring. But the risk-based monitoring it only reduces the cost of monitoring. Monitoring is only a portion of the overall trial management costs, and it does nothing to address the larger costs that are incurred at the trial site in performing medical procedures and collecting the data that results. So risk-based monitoring, even when optimized, really only reduces the cost of conducting a clinical trial by about 4%. And it's a one-time savings. Once it's in place, further refinements of it yield very marginal improvements. So perhaps more promising are innovative methodologies in the design of clinical trials. And I'll talk briefly about two. And at this point, I'm going to present to you some examples. These are not necessarily trials that Amgen has or intends to launch, but they are worked examples that I think I can stand behind as being fairly high-quality evidence of the potential benefits of these approaches. First, to highlight adaptive designs, these we think have significant promise to both to reduce the number of subjects who must participate in a trial and to shorten the trial timelines. The data that I'm showing to you here is from an example of a phase 2 dose-finding trial in which there are repeated looks at the data and decisions whether to proceed with the trial as designed, to terminate early for success or to terminate early for futility. The trial did not incorporate more advanced strategies such as response adaptive randomization. But even with a relatively simple approach like this, you can see in the left-hand panel that there are savings of around 20% in the number of subjects that have to be randomized in order to reach a decision. And there's a benefit, importantly, whether the drug works or whether it doesn't. So we not only reach decisions more quickly about proceeding with a potentially effective product, but we can also stop randomizing patients more quickly if the product is ineffective. And those reductions in sample size, they translate directly into savings around 4 to 6 months in trial duration and about a 20 or 25% savings in cost. So this is promising. I think it remains to be seen how broadly adaptive methods can be used across an R&D portfolio. Right now, they're used fairly extensively in phase 1 and to a certain extent in phase 2. The more advanced adaptive techniques are used, unfortunately, sparingly in phase 3, where the greatest costs are incurred. Another promising approach is the platform trial, where more than one agent studied in a single trial or a single agent studied in multiple disease types. There are some well-known actual examples of complicated platform trials, such as the I-SPY trial. What I'm showing here in schematic form is a relatively simple example where 2 anti-cancer agents are being exploited and studied in parallel trials that could potentially be combined into a single platform trial with a single master protocol and consolidated startup procedures, and then a combined comparator arm. And this is a real example that we've thoroughly worked up, and our work suggests that in this case we can reduce the number of subjects that need to be randomized by about 1/4, reduce the trial duration by about 1/4, and the trial costs by a bit more than 25%. And this, again, is a very simple platform trial. Greater savings in time and money could be realized with more complicated designs with greater numbers of experimental agents, for example. So, again, a promising approach. There are challenges in executing these trials. The drugs have to be at essentially simultaneous stages of development to be put into a single platform design, and there are other challenges. But it's something that we think has considerable potential. And then lastly, we come to use of real-world evidence. And the first example I want to share with you is not a real-world, it's not actually a real-world evidence example at all. It's an example of a highly simplified cardiovascular outcomes trial, but it's relevant, I think, because it's illustrative of the potential savings that can be realized if the amount of data that needs to be collected strictly for the purpose of the trial is reduced to a bare minimum. So in this example, we have a marketed cardiovascular product with a well-established safety profile. that's already been tested in large outcomes trials. And the trial here that's being considered is a cardiovascular outcomes trial in which the study visit frequency is decreased to once every 4 months from once every, say, every month in a pre-registrational trial. There is no routine lab assessment since none is required for the product. And the collection of on-study data is limited to the key study endpoints and serious adverse events. And with this kind of highly limited for-study data assessment, we estimate that we can reduce the cost per patient per month by about 2/3. So I think this is illustrative of what could be achieved with a pragmatic trial in this setting, where the only intervention is randomization, and there's little or no data collection strictly for the purposes of the trial. And then lastly, I want to just describe the potential for in cases where we can completely replace clinical trial data with real-world evidence. And summarized on this slide are 2 examples. They're both examples for marketed products where one could contemplate a real-world study, a retrospective study that uses data that already exists for these products. In one case, data in a new geography, in the other case, data in a new indication. In these cases, there's no for-study data collection, and the cost reduction is on the order of 85 to 90% for these relatively small exercises. It's also clear that in these settings, we can reduce the time that's necessary to generate the data by 70 to 80%. In these cases, from about 4 years for a randomized trial to about 1 year for a retrospective real-world evidence study. So to summarize, the options that we have at this point to address the cost disease of clinical development, changes in study conduct that affect only the sponsor's activities, such as risk-based monitoring, are important, but really will not get us where we need to go. Adaptive trial designs and platform designs are promising, particularly if they can be exploited broadly across a portfolio. But it would appear that at least on a study level, that the most promising approaches we could adopt would be those that use real-world evidence to minimize the amount of data that needs to be collected in a clinical trial, or to eliminate the data collection entirely. And if these approaches could be deployed across a broad portfolio, they really could help to bend the cost curve and reverse the rate of increase in R&D cost. So to summarize, we're in an exciting but challenging time. People have been promising for decades that we were on the cusp of a transformation in our ability to develop and launch new medicines, but I think that probably today we could say that make that claim with more justice than ever before. We face a significant challenge in capitalizing on this important medical opportunity by the cost of pharmaceutical R&D throughout the life cycle, including the cost of maintaining products over the market. Those costs have continued to rise despite aggressive efforts at R&D organizations to control costs through conventional continuous improvement, and such efforts will not significantly reduce the cost moving forward. Much more promising are changes in study design and conduct, such as adaptive methodologies and platform designs, and then probably most promising are approaches that replace data collected specifically for the purpose of the trial with data that's collected in the process of providing care. And that, I think, is why this workshop is so exciting, because it's here that we will develop the standards that will allow real-world evidence to play a larger and larger role in our portfolio of research and development activities. Thank you.